Well, thank you. Fantastic to be here. I'll say off the top, too, that we have a fantastic comms team, and we've spent, the better part of a week kind of going over comments and everything here today. But the trouble, the good part and the bad part of being in the middle of the agenda here is the fact I've sat here and listened to the conference for a few hours now, and half of what I want to say has changed. So after all the comments and time we spent preparing remarks, I'm just going to kind of wing it here. Obviously, I'm new into the role. I've been here about 9 months. I've heard somewhere that you get to claim being new into a position for about a year, so I'm going to fully take all of that to exercise. And obviously, it's a big department. We're deeply integrated into so many aspects of what agriculture looks like in the state. I find I'm learning new things about just exactly how the department operates on a daily basis. Same as the quality of life agencies, right? We work closely with EGLE, with DNR, other state agencies. There's a tremendous amount of fantastic work going on the ground today. And getting your arms around all of this and understanding how all the pieces come together is no small feat. But it speaks to, right, just of how integrated and complex some of these issues are, of how many different entities we have working in this area. So efforts like today, where we're bringing together different groups, talking about these things as a collaborative endeavor here, I think are really important. The water quality piece is one of the highest level initiatives we have at MDARD. It's a passion project of mine. I come in spending some time in academia, spending time in various stakeholder groups throughout Michigan, working on water quality issues. I spent a lot of time at Michigan Agribusiness working on water quality issues. So to be able to come into MDARD now, to be able to work on this as a priority issue of advancing just where we're going with water quality in the state's a real pleasure for me and something I take a lot of personal satisfaction in. I am so enthused of the fact that this is such a high priority for the Whitmer administration. It's an administration demonstrably committed to environmental outcomes, and getting this water quality piece right is absolutely a high priority, and you see that reflected in a lot of our budget and where we're choosing to make investments, and we're going to continue to focus on working. So a lot of discussion today of where we're at, and obviously we've got work to do. Agriculture does not have the results in this area in the way that we need, in the way that we expect to have. I think there's a lot of kudos to the point source efforts of hitting those goals. Agriculture's got a lot of work to do. And the fact that we're just not anywhere close to the trajectory that we need in this area, I think it speaks to the complexity of it, but it speaks to the fact that we can't keep doing what we've been doing and expecting different results. It's going to take a lot of work in different areas to get results in the way that all of us are committed to achieving. So, again, right, as we go through what's already been discussed here, I think a lot of these themes are absolutely talking points we have on a daily basis in MDARD. We recognize the ability and the need to continue investing in monitoring, for instance. We don't have nearly the monitoring effort we need in the state. We can't adequately track where the problems are coming out from today. And we're certainly going to be at a disadvantage about measuring progress when we do start implementing more aggressive conservation practices of understanding how we're tracking progress and how we're getting there. So that's an area we're going to continue to double down on, and I think you'll see increased investment and priority on that, the monitoring aspects. We need more research. We spent a lot of time talking about research here already this morning. We simply don't have all the necessary tools at our disposal to really nail down the problem and get into the weeds on how we're specifically supposed to address these issues. And it can go into real substantive things for farmers of specific cover crop mixtures, the relative role of total phosphorus and dissolved reactive phosphorus and things like tile lines. We have an awful lot of work to do of better understanding what the areas are of implementation on the ground moving forward. We're going to have to do work on delivery. Both in terms of what you've heard today of talking about the value of prioritizing where we're implementing conservation on the ground. We're going to have to ask for more out of delivery implementation personnel in terms of expertise and the ability to deliver value to farmers and walking with them of implementing more conservation. So we're taking some definitive steps already at MDARD to put building blocks in place of where we can continue to build on. We're doing hiring. We're hiring water quality specialists so that we're out on the landscape better understanding just where losses are coming from and how we're managing those sorts of things. We're continuing to invest in what the department is doing of the role of science. So we're hiring a chief scientist at the department to work in a number of areas, largely around climate resiliency, water quality, emerging contaminants. We've got to make scientific expertise a more fundamental part of what we're doing at the department. And really, I mean, implementing what ag talks about all the time of we are a science-based industry. We need to have science more at the heart of how we're doing a lot of programmatic and policy development at the department. We're investing $15 million in soil health and regenerative agriculture as part of this last budget, really following in the prioritization of what the governor's outlined with the Healthy Climate Act, but specifically investing heavily in research, in staffing, and programmatic development around soil health. And that's going to continue to be a bigger and bigger piece of how we're addressing this water quality issue here in Michigan. So all of this comes down to changing management practices in the field. That the edge of field practices are important, the constructed wetlands of how we manage water downstream, certainly big pieces of what we're doing, but a lot of this has to be in-field management too. And that's where the soil health piece comes in a lot of ways. It's improving biological functional capacity in soils. It's managing water flows of water holding capacity, infiltration, changing the way we're managing just soils in general, not a piecemeal approach of implementing selective cafeteria-style conservation practices, but an inclusive approach to how we fundamentally manage soils. There's going to have to be harder discussions on topics around what management looks like in fields today. Fertilizer management. We've got a lot of work to do in what on-the-ground fertilizer management looks like today. All too often, we are still applying fertilizers at rates that are in excess of fertilizer recommendations. We don't spend enough time talking about rate and placement, timing. We're not doing enough work on ensuring that we're not applying fertilizers ahead of high-intensity rainfall events. So a lot of this falls within the broad context of 4R management. But we've talked about the mobility of phosphorus into these systems already today. Having some real discussions about how we overhaul fertilizer management in the soil, whether it's subsurface placement, whether it's specific focuses on timing. The small instances like this have such a disproportionate effect on downstream loading. It's the small details that are going to matter. It's going to take having comprehensive discussions on manure management in the state. And look, the industry in general, but livestock in particular, has seen tremendous consolidation over the last few decades. There's a lot of reasons for this. But the reality of it is today is we have fewer and fewer livestock farms, and they have more and more cows on a limited footprint. So there's going to have to be discussions about how we continue to move away from waste disposal mindsets into more of a crop fertility-based approach to this. It is inconsistent at best that we're pushing producers in a row crop scenario to limit any sort of fertilizer applications at 40 ppm, but we're still allowing livestock applicators to load up phosphorus levels to much higher levels. Obviously, there's a lot of pieces to this, and we're not going to turn ships overnight on this sort of thing. But those are discussions we're going to have to be grappling with as an industry here of what we're going to have moving forward on these pieces. The irony with all of this is the fact that we have a manure location problem, not a manure quantity problem. We have manure in all the wrong places. If we're serious about building soil health, if we're seriously about building biological capacity of soils, manure is a piece of this. The problem is we just are putting too much manure in too few places today. I do think that we're going to struggle making impacts on water quality outcomes in the way we need if we're only focusing on this as a water quality issue. That so much of this so quickly becomes more structural and foundational to how we're building agricultural systems today. And farms are businesses, right? That most of the time, farmers are rational economic actors, not always, but a lot of times. And the way you build farms today is you simplify management, you mitigate risk, you make it easier to manage more and more acres under unified control. You grow your farm by adding acres, by adding head of livestock. And at some point when we have conservation professionals show up on farms and say, we want to talk to you about implementing cover crops and reducing your tillage and expanding your rotation, you're telling farmers you want to make their management on an acre-by-acre basis more complicated. You're asking them to take on short-term risk. You're asking them to invite social stigma from neighbors, which is a real thing. And I think the scientific advisory panel will talk a little bit more about that later today. But we're basically asking farmers to adopt suites of practices that the market is sending them signals to grow in exactly the opposite way, right? These two things aren't compatible with one another in the way that we're building farms today. So, and again, I think this isn't necessarily the case that farmers don't understand the value of conservation, or that they just need to learn more about the impacts of their practices on the field. And if they only understood that the lake turned green in the summer, then they would change practices. Like, we're going to have to be building systems and talking about these things of how we provide comprehensive, substantial economic incentives and signals to farmers to do things in different ways. So how we go about framing these discussions, I think, becomes really important too, because too easily this becomes discussions about environmental interests over environmental outcomes, or about environmental outcomes versus economic indicators for farms. And look, we're losing opportunities to really address these fundamental problems in agriculture if we devolve it down to that level. I think it was the winter of 18, probably, of when Eagle was going around and doing listening sessions around the CAFO permit. And I sat in this room with, I'm sure, many of you, as we had discussions, and we heard from farmers talk about the economic threats they were going to be imposed with if CAFO regulations as proposed went into place. And so here we are, right? We're battling over the economic short-term realities of what things look like on farms and pitting them against environmental outcomes. We've got to make this a broader discussion about who is winning in agriculture. And regardless if we're worried about environmental outcomes, if we have stakes in economic success, there's a lot of shared values here that we're missing out in this agricultural system today. And I think there becomes a message here too of as we look around our agricultural systems, like, is this what success looks like? Is this what winning looks like? Like, do you want to have to grow your farm by simply adding more acres and adding more cows to the detriment of your neighbor, right? Because at some point, like, we can't all be farmers anymore if everybody has to have more and more land. Is this the agricultural system that is in line with our values of what we want to see? Because if you start looking around, right, your school districts are consolidating. We don't have access to grocery stores. There aren't economic opportunities in rural small America today. The quality of life is not there in the way that we want it. That this has to be a broader discussion about, like, how we're building Michigan and what is in our collective best interest of residents of the state. And there is a path here of investing in what is in our best interests, in what's the agricultural system's best interest, what's in the environmental outcome best interest. There's some really promising pilot efforts underway in a lot of different areas of taking some of these regen ag principles and building ag value chains that are focusing on local communities and that have demonstrable environmental outcomes with them, that have a focus on how we're feeding people, of the health of communities, investments in what is in the best interest of all of us. And I don't mean for this to become too pie in the sky of broad abstract things of, yeah, but at the same time, like, phosphorus going to Lake Erie is kind of a thing. Like, we're going to have to be thinking here about how we're defining winners within this system and what the future of ag looks like. And if we're making more concerted investments in how we manage land, if we give growers clear economic incentives to achieve these environmental outcomes, and they make more money doing it, and the byproducts of which are the fact that there are going to be more jobs in rural America, that the health of citizens is higher, it's general quality of life, there's upward economic mobility. That's how we tackle these kinds of issues. So I think there's a lot of opportunity ahead of us within this space. I think there are some tough conversations ahead of us, right? And there's some challenging aspects of how we're going to be about doing this. A lot of this is upending status quo. And those who tend to benefit a lot from the existing status quo tend to have an investment in maintaining the status quo. But I challenge all of us to look at this ag system that we have today and say, is this consistent with the values of those of us that live in Michigan? And is this the future of what we want it to look like? If we start changing and addressing what our system looks like with the values in mind today, and we start making daily decisions on where we invest and how we prioritize things with those values issues in mind, we're going to start seeing improvements in water quality as well. So I'm excited to be at the department and being a small piece of what some of this change can be. I'm committed to the fact of working with so many of you around here in the basin and in the room today that I know share a lot of these values, that want to get to us a place where we have a better agricultural system with improved water quality. So I look forward to continued partnerships. I look forward to continued talking with all of you. I do want to make sure we have a philosophy as a department doing a lot of listening, but being able to back that up with some bold, innovative action to get us where we need to go. So I'm looking forward to the rest of the conference. I'll be hanging out in the back, happy to address further questions, and look forward to working with you all on this.